Good evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt. Welcome to another edition of Danielle Smith Uncensored, a guest hosting another segment of our special series we're doing on controversial COVID topics, uncensored. How you doing, Danielle?
Excellent. Thanks so much for hosting this again tonight, Derek.
Thank you. And I want to assure all visitors I am not the shortest here. The camera can play some odd tricks. Just want to assure everyone that I'm not as short as I look on camera right now. We are joined by a very special guest tonight. Erin Coates is the wife of Pastor Grace Life Church of Stony Plain, Alberta. Erin Coates is the, I'm tying myself up here. Erin Coates is the wife of Pastor Coates, who I think all of our viewers know right now has been jailed for roughly 2 weeks now. He has been denied release on bail because he refuses to stop preaching, which was a condition of bail. He was up on appeal of that bail condition today, and big surprise, delayed decision. They're kicking the can down the road. We're going to be talking about that tonight. Erin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Derek and Danielle.
Oh, my pleasure. Do you want me to take it away, Derek?
Well, just one more second. We've got it. We're going to have another guest joining us very soon. John Carpay or Jay Cameron of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms will be joining us momentarily. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is representing Pastor Coates in his battle with the Alberta government and its efforts to lock him up and stop him from continuing to hold Sunday services at the Grace Life Church. So we're going to be joined by the legal representation from either John Carpay or Jay Cameron. They'll be joining us very soon. Before we go ahead, well, I don't know if you can remember it, but I'll put it to Danielle to introduce our sponsor for today, and we'll get going. But first, I want to just thank all of our Western Standard members who have joined up supporting Bailout-Free Media, and encourage everyone who's not yet a member of the Western Standard to go to westernstandardonline.com/membership and get a free trial for 15 days and see if you want to pick up what we're putting down. So I'll kick it to you, Danielle.
And I'll kick it back to you, Derek, because you put the sponsorship in private chat last time and you haven't done that this time, so I can't read it.
I kind of kicked it to you hoping you'd remember, but our sponsor today is Chiron's Way. It's natural, drug-free healthcare for stress relief, for a lot of the issues you might be facing right now. We've got a great business profile coming up of them soon, but for drug-free, natural healthcare during these trying times, check out chironsway.com for more information. We're going to kick it to you, Danielle, right now, and let you take it away.
Thanks so much for that, Derek. And thank you, Erin, so much for joining us tonight. I want to just start by telling you how confused I am by your husband's case, because there's a member of your church who is the daughter of a listener of mine. So she's been keeping me up to date and on all of the developments. And it seemed bizarre to me that the pastor would be put in prison. Fair enough. Seems doubly bizarre that he was denied bail. Fair enough. Seems triply bizarre that he was denied appeal on the bail and that they kicked it over to tomorrow. So he's potentially going to be imprisoned in the remand center until May the 3rd to 5th, when his case is supposed to be heard. The reason I'm so perplexed about this is because I thought it was against the criminal code to tell a pastor that they were not allowed to give sermons, and yet that seems to be one of the bail conditions. I'm also looking at this story from a couple of days ago. A Kyle Larson has been released from the remand center with a warning from Edmonton police. They issue a public warning after a sexual offender is released again. They have reasonable grounds to believe Kyle Larson, 29, will commit another sexual offense against someone under the age of 16 while in the community. This comes from the Edmonton Police Service. So they clearly think that your husband is a greater danger to the community than an offender like this. This is why this case is so perplexing to me. One more thing I read today, and we'll get your lawyer on to explain some of this as well, is that the remedy, even if he is found guilty, isn't jail. So he may be jailed for months, and even if they find him guilty, they'll release him. So there's lots of legal stuff that is going on here. I want my personal contention is that the government is making a mockery of our criminal justice system. I know that that is not the uniform view across the board there. I know you faced a lot of pushback on some of the crueler mediums, and I wish people had had a chance to hear our conversation earlier, because you are so kind. And I just want to start by asking people, especially in your comments, just be kind, because Erin Coates and Pastor James Coates mean you no harm. They're really just fighting for their freedom and fighting for your freedom. So let me just first get an opening comment from you, Erin. I think we had hoped that there would be a special guest joining us here this evening, that your husband was going to be released today. Tell us how you're feeling, knowing that it's going to be delayed till tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely disheartened. My children are disheartened. It didn't look very positive from our end. So it's hard not to be dejected and to feel a little bit weary. There are men opening their churches doing the exact same thing that James has done, and yet he's in jail. So that's a little, I think what's really hard about the whole situation is it's confusing children as to what justice is. And I've heard comments from children now, they're afraid of the police because they're arresting a man that is doing good in the community and then letting criminals out of jail. I think there was 50 that were released the day that James was put in prison. So I think it's confusing them as the next generation, which is hugely important to inform them as to what justice and law is. And that's just confusing to them, and it's disheartening a little bit.
Well, I don't want to talk about the sawdust in someone else's eye without acknowledging the log in my own eye. I hope I got that one right, Erin. But you know what? I decided when they refused to ease the restrictions after we'd gotten below 300, that I was going back to the restrictions that they had in place in summer. I'm going to see my parents. I'm going to see my cohort. I'm going to go to business meetings. And so I just want you to know that I'm not following it to the letter of the law either. So I don't want you to think I'm sitting here in judgment of you. But that's the odd part about it, is that if people are being honest with themselves as they're watching this, I'm pretty sure there's a whole pile of people who aren't following it to the letter of the law either. And so that I think is one of the issues that we're facing, is it seems like it's kind of arbitrary. It seems like they're making an example out of James. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I do. It's really unfortunate. I mean, I think our church works really hard during the week to abide by all of the restrictions that have been put in place, especially when we're in public. We're social distancing, we're hand sanitizing, we're wearing a mask when we're out. So it seems a little bit flip-flopped, that people are willing to allow restrictions to ease in other parts, but in the church it's different.
And I think that's important, because one of the things that I got from James's really quite excellent sermon on February the 14th was when I had the premier on my show, he talked about a libertarian sermon, and that's not what his sermon was. His sermon very clearly recognizes the role of government, and that the role of government should be respected, and that law and order should be respected. And yet, why is this an exception? And I'm going to play a portion of his speech, but I want you to set it up for us so that we can understand when I play this portion about why he thinks that Caesar has no business in coming into his church and telling him how to do things. Tell us the distinction. Why be law-abiding when you're out in public, but what changes when you come through the door?
Yeah, I think it's just the worship that we don't want Caesar dictating how we are to worship God, because he is our ultimate authority. He is the one who's laid out in his word how we are to worship him and how we're to function as a church. And so the restrictions that have been put on us are clear violations of what God has asked us to do in worshiping him. Even with the 15%, as a church, when we gather, we're testifying to the fact that we're a blood-bought body of people, and that he's worthy of our worship. And so that's really difficult when you start restricting certain people and calling them numbers. They have names, they have faces, they have problems. And so it's only in regards to worship, we totally uphold the law, and so much of moral law and criminal law is actually in God's word. And so there's a lot of continuity there in regards to how we would uphold the law and uphold even our RCMP and want to really respect them and the difficulty that they face on a daily basis to have to serve our community. They're putting their lives on the line for us. And so we want to do the best to be sure that we're backing them and helping them in communities. And so I think that's the only distinction, is when it comes to the worship of God, it has to be God's law that dictates it and not the government. And I know Kenny believes that. I read an article that he wrote in, or actually it was a speech, I believe, that he gave in 2014 in regards to conscience. So I know he knows it.
Let's see if we can play a portion of that speech now. And I don't know if maybe you can restart it from that point, because I don't hear the volume on it there, Derek. No, we're not getting the volume on it, Derek. Technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Give me 30 seconds. Maybe just go on with her for another second.
You know, because I think one of the things that Kenny has argued is, but 90.9% of all the other churches are following the rules. The 15% isn't a barrier. The social distancing isn't a problem. The restrictions on singing, they can abide by them. So why can't you? So explain, first of all, we should maybe talk about the environment that you have in the church, so that we know what kind of restrictions you or your husband is being alleged to have broken.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comment dismisses the fact that not all faith, like James would not call himself a faith leader. He would call himself an ambassador of Jesus Christ, whose life is founded on the word of God. And so you would have to that's a general sweeping comment that all churches and faiths all worship the same or have the same authority. Our authority is the word of God. And so I believe that comment just doesn't leave room for conscience. And our conscience is bound to the word of God as our rule and authority for life. So that's where I think that comment is not helpful. Now, our church, we're a family. We love each other. We help each other in life. And the majority of that work is really done on a Sunday. And so how our service works is the word of God is preached. We sing the word of God. We take communion. We do baptism. And after the sermon, because we believe that God is speaking to us through his word, and when the word does a work in our heart, we are communicating with one another. We're helping each other live during the week. We're bearing one another's burdens. There's people grieving. There's people hurting. There's people losing their jobs. And so we're just doing life together and making sure that we're not just physically healthy, but that we're emotionally and spiritually healthy as well. So we really just seek to take care of the whole person. And we do that as a family. I mean, scripture calls us brothers and sisters in Christ. So we're really just seeking to love one another. And the majority of that work happens on a Sunday.
So why can't you limit the number of people in the church to 15%? I don't know how big your church is, so I'm trying to get a sense of what your fire code capacity would be. For
we're good to go, I think.
Okay.
We want to go to that first.
Okay, so if we're all set up, let's play that first, and then I'm going to get back to this.
Has unavoidable political implications since the word addresses biblical morality. But that's about it. And so you might be going, well, James, what's changed? I mean, you seem to have changed your position on this whole matter of your involvement in quote unquote politics. Well, for one, I've got to evaluate whether or not I've been negligent. It's possible that I've been negligent, that I have not been fulfilling my God-given responsibility. I've got to evaluate that. I've got to consider that. But here's the fundamental difference. For the first time in my ministry, the government is reaching into the life of the church. That's my domain. That's the domain of the elders here at Grace Life Church. That's the Lord Jesus Christ's domain. Attempting to dictate to us the terms of worship is not the government's jurisdiction, and I refuse to give the government what isn't theirs. Caesar has no jurisdiction here.
So as you can see, it was a pretty well-received statement that he made. That's good there, Derek. We'll go on with our conversation here. So I think that's important because I think what I found really grounding about James's sermon was that he is a law abider and he does ground his theology in being a law abider. He believes in law and order, but he wants to have dominion over what happens within the church door. So let's talk about how difficult that would be for you to practice your faith the way you normally do with these restrictions. So I asked you before, so how many people would normally be in your congregation?
Well, before this, there was just over 350. So we went about 350, 380. We've significantly grown during the pandemic just because, churches are closed and people are hurting. There's depression and they're struggling with various issues of their heart and they really need human contact. And so our church was one of those safe havens for people. And even people who don't know God have come through our doors because they're just losing hope. There's no hope for them with the pandemic. So with the 15%, you're also masked, you're social distanced, you can't sing, which is just a big part of our life. Singing to God is such a joy. And then you're not supposed to speak to one another. You have to leave immediately after the service. And so that just really hinders us in the work that we can do in one another's life and encouraging them to live holy lives during the week and go into your jobs and live healthy lives within the community and helping your community.
Couldn't you tell us though, so if it was 50 people that you'd be allowed, I guess, give or take, based on what you've said there, why would that be difficult to manage if you were doing multiple sermons, for instance, throughout the course of the day? Because that's, I think, what other churches are doing to accommodate their church community. Why not do that?
Yeah, sure. Well, we have 7 elders, and we believe that in a worship service, you're to have your elders and your deacons present. And once you put your elders and your deacons present, because they're there to do the work, to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry, we're already at 50. And so you're limiting our leaders in regards to the responsibility. So you used a word there. I forget, not dictating. How I look at it and how Scripture looks at it is James has been given a stewardship by God. And so he's not allowed to fiddle with what God has commanded him. And I liken this story to a king who has a kingdom, and he has this wonderfully beautiful young bride, and he's leaving on a trip, and he's leaving this steward in charge of her to take care of the kingdom and to take care of his wife. And we can use the COVID restrictions in there. Well, the king goes away, and then this steward is restricting her communication with the people. He's not feeding her well. He's not washing her. He's not letting her shower, because we call it washing in the word is one of the things that Scripture uses. And so when the king comes back to see his beautiful wife, she is just sickly and she's not thriving in life. What's that king going to do to the steward? There's going to be a severe punishment for him. And so James takes that very seriously. This is a stewardship that has been entrusted to him by God, and he doesn't have permission to limit the gathering or limit how people believe as individuals they are to worship God. So we're individuals, but we're in a corporate body. So that's the whole pull, is that we're a body, and this just doesn't seem to be ending. And I watched a little bit of a show you did with Colonel Redmond, I believe, where he says we're always going to have pandemics. So if this is the precedent, we just have a responsibility before the Lord to care for his people, and we can't restrict that.
I wanted you to go back to March, April, because it was a different world in March, April for all of us. I mean, I don't hold government to, I don't hold any grudge against them for taking some of the restrictions they did then when we didn't know much about this virus. We weren't sure how it was going to spread. We didn't know who was most at risk. Your church also dealt with things differently back in March and April. And I want people to understand that, because I think there's been a bit of an evolution in how you've been looking at this virus and how we have to live with it. So tell us what you did back in March, April.
Yeah, we followed the restrictions to a T back in March and April. And that really hurt our people. It hurt them emotionally, physically, spiritually. So as the emergency protocol, or whatever it was called, came to an end, our guys, all of our leaders, because James he's the lead teaching pastor, but he has a plurality of elders. They have equal authority in the church. So he's not like the head guy. There's multiple guys that are put in place to shepherd the flock. So we followed that, and not knowing what is this, or are we harming our people? Are we harming our community? So as that came to an end, and we were speaking to a doctor, and we were speaking to multiple people who are working in hospitals, we're seeing the effect on our people. Our leaders just said, let's roll this out wisely. We're going to, when you come to church, it's your choice whether you want to come. If you're afraid of the disease, you can stay back and live stream. If you have health issues, you can stay back and live stream. So we've never forced anybody to come to church. But we also say, like, if you're sick, if you're not feeling well, if you have any of these symptoms, don't come to church, live stream that. But that's just basic love. If you have anything, like, just stay home. Don't go out in public if you're sick. That's the way it's always been. And so, yeah, our guys really wrestled with it all the way along. But I think what it was they had to wrestle with what's their responsibility towards God as the shepherd of the people, as they were starting to express just difficulty in living life and not being able to worship God altogether. So they had to really thoughtfully and prayerfully evaluate everything.
I see John Carpay has joined us. John, I'll be bringing you in a bit, but we've got a few things that we want to talk about with Erin Coates. And John is, of course, the executive director of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom. We'll have a longer session with him next week because he has a whole pile of cases that he's taking forward, and we want to get an update on all of them. So I just wanted to welcome you, and thanks for being able to join us today. So Erin, let's then go back. So because I want to understand, because I know that you've made a lot of provisions for those who don't feel comfortable being in a large congregation. Did you tell me as well that you had a sort of an area cordoned off with plexiglass for those that if they want to sit separately, they can?
Yes. Yeah, we have a balcony so that they can come upstairs. They call and they reserve that seating where they can be masked and social distance. If that's what they believe, then that section is there for them to do that.
Tell us about the kids in the church as well, because that's one of the things we talked about earlier, is that you've got a lot of kids who come to service.
We have a lot of children. I don't know what to say other than people come to our church and they're like, wow, there is so many children here. And I love the children, these little toddlers who come up to you and they tell you their life story of what they've done that week. And I think that our church is a safe haven for them, in that when they're out in the community, everyone's masked, that no one's looking at you. There's no smiling happening. So our church brings a level of normacy and humanity, I think, to a growing generation that really need to experience laughing and smiling and hugging, all of things that science has proved to be beneficial to a growing child and even adults. But yeah, I just love them. They're wonderful. And I feel like what we give them on a Sunday is healthy.
I like the point about a sense of normalcy, because you're right, kids aren't getting that very many places. What about the argument that someone would make about the need for you to protect the elders in your community, the seniors who might be over age? Because we know by looking at the profile of this disease and when it manifests, those over the age of 70 those with multiple conditions, those are the ones who are most at risk. And I think part of the reason the premier clamped down so hard on churches is early on, there was a church which turned out to be a super spreader event. And I think sadly, an 81-year-old who attended the service ended up dying. So I understand where the idea comes from that he wants to provide this protection. But what can you give us as a way of comfort that that those individuals are being protected in the environment that you're offering?
Right. Well, I think they need to be able to choose. We have a 81 or 82-year-old gentleman in our congregation who's fought in the Cold War, and you cannot tell him that he's not going to come to church. He's fought for freedom. He's been in the war, and for them to tell him that he can't be with the people that he loves is devastating for him. So I think that individuals have to weigh the risks. The elderly need to weigh the risks and choose whether they're going to live stream. We will do our best to care for them any way that we can. I know that members of our congregation, when they're going to visit their grandparents or their parents, they will quarantine for 2 weeks before they go and see their parents or their grandparents. And then in the community, we're masked and we're social distanced. We're not leaving the house if we're sick. We have our hands sanitized, which if one thing COVID has just blessed me with, it is clean hands, because I'm a little bit of a germaphobe. So is my husband. Just making sure that we're caring for them that way.
Let's talk about what happened in the church, because there were 2 exposures that you found out about, and you had a system in place to double check and make sure that it wasn't going to result in additional spreading. Can you tell us that story?
Sure. We had some cases in the summer, like you said, and we weren't sure if they were in the gathering before or after they had contracted it. And so our guys pulled back on live stream and just did live stream, told everyone to stay home for 2 weeks to make sure that it hadn't spread within our gathering, and it didn't. But that's what our guys are willing to do. And then it's easy to do our own internal contact tracing because, we know everyone who's there. So we pulled back when that happened because we didn't know, had they talked to somebody and they didn't know they had COVID and they were in the gathering. So, but they had not been, and that it wasn't transferred. So
that's kind of remarkable, because those exposures then happened, or incidents happened in the summer, but we saw this huge surge of cases that took place in November and December. Were you meeting all the way through, and were there any other instances that happened?
Yeah, we have been meeting all the way through. There was what they call, I think, an outbreak at one of the homeless shelters that our guys work at, and there was, I think, 2 cases but they weren't in the gathering. They hadn't been in the gathering in 2 weeks, and so we didn't feel the need to quarantine, and it never spread. So yeah, we're very careful, I think. In how we do things. We do care about people physically. I don't think our guys have been careless in this. I think they've done everything just really prayerfully, weighing, because it's not just COVID now that's a concern. There's other things that are a concern in the community, and like suicide. If you just go on the Canadian Mental Health Association and you look at the numbers of suicide going up, or you go on the Canadian Center for Substance Abuse, you can see things are going up. There's a hopelessness in people, and closing our doors to people who need help and hope is a devastating thing. So you're weighing, it's not just COVID. There's more than COVID at risk here. And I would just love our government to start acknowledging that fact. To know that 1 in 10 people are dealing with suicidal thoughts is a massive number. And that suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death among youth, according to the Canadian Mental Health Association. That's serious. These are our children that are facing this. So yeah, I would just love for them to start looking at stuff like that, looking at the whole person.
What I'm trying to impress upon our listeners is that those who are challenging the restrictions are often mischaracterized as taking the view of, well, just let her rip. And it doesn't sound to me like you're just letting her rip. It sounds to me like if there was an exposure, you've got a number of things in place. You've got a 2-week let's do live stream protocol. You've got contact tracing, and you're not going to put people at risk if there's an exposure. Am I hearing that correctly? If you what would you do today if you found out that there had been somebody in the congregation last week who was tested positive?
I don't know for sure, but I don't know why we wouldn't do the same thing that we've always done in caring for people. Yeah, we do take it seriously.
All right.
And there is a mischaracterization, because all of a sudden you're anti-mask and anti-vaccine, and that's just, I think, lacking an ability to engage with the actual facts and just kind of characterizing us as a certain kind of people, which is just unfair. I wear a mask everywhere I go,
So let's then talk about why your husband was singled out, because you've told us a bit. So what denomination are you, just so people understand? Because I grew up Catholic, so in a Catholic service, because it's so distant and you've got the main priest and altar boys, there's not the same amount of leadership that you have to work around as is needed in your denomination. So what is your faith?
Well, we are Bible-believing Christians is really the only thing I can say, because if I say we're evangelical or a different kind of, that just has so many different meanings. But if you go on our website to gracelife.ca, we have our doctrinal statement there on what we believe on various things. And we really just wanted our what we teach to define us. So we're non-denominational, but we definitely lean in the Reformed camp of theology.
Okay, so you said that earlier that James is only one of many of those who do the pastoral service, who do the sermons. So why has he been singled out this way? Why isn't everybody? Why aren't all 50 of the church leadership sitting in remand?
Well, not 50 of the leadership. If you do our 6 elders and then our deacons and their families together, you have about 50.
Okay, I see now.
If not more. We have families that have a lot of children. So, probably because he is the lead pastor and he's the one that takes the pulpit the majority of time. We have an associate pastor that is preaching now, but James does the majority of the preaching week in and week out is James. And so you kind of have a, what do they call it? First among equals is kind of what they call it. So
but that's important, because the church services have continued on, even though he's been imprisoned for the last 3 weeks. And so people want consistency in how their government acts. And this seems very inconsistent. If what he did was a crime worthy of being imprisoned for 3 weeks, I guess, are the other pastors at risk then too?
I just don't even know. I don't know what they're doing. I wish I knew. I mean, the RCMP have been there the last couple weeks. AHS was there this Sunday. So we just don't even know what's going on. I don't know why James was singled out. I'm guessing it's because he's at the front and he is kind of the face of Grace Life, even though he is the first among equals. We have elders that are all in the same plane. So yeah, I guess he just was the one willing to take that. So
okay, we'll get into some of the legal issues a little bit more with John. But tell us what happened that day. So I watched the sermon, and that was the last day you saw him, right?
Sunday the 14th, he preached the sermon, and we got a call from the RCMP saying that they asked James to call Monday, I believe. And so he called them Monday, and they asked him to turn himself in, that he was going to be arrested for violating the undertaking, which he didn't sign, which apparently it doesn't matter if he signed it or not. But and so the Tuesday, he didn't think he was going to be detained, but he was detained, and that was the last time that I saw him.
Why did he not think he was going to be detained?
There was some indication, not verbally like, no, you won't go to jail, but there was some indication saying like, you can probably drive yourself. Your wife doesn't have to drive your minivan for you. So there was just some indication, I think, there that I think they thought he would have signed the conditions, really is what it is. But for him to sign the conditions is to abrogate, is to let go of his pastoral duties, and severely restrict them. So
do you remember what the conditions are, or should I ask John about that in a minute?
Yeah, John can probably bring a little bit more clarity for me, but the conditions are that he doesn't keep doing services like he had previously done, and he has to adhere to whatever restrictions are in place, and that if he doesn't agree to do that, he's not allowed on Grace Life property.
Wow. Okay. So we're getting a nod from John. So when he gets arrested and detained, like, tell us what happened there, because it's just so strange to have, first of all, him being arrested in the first place, and then you might think, okay, well, maybe there's processing issues and they're going to teach him a lesson and they'll hold him overnight, but that's not what happened here. So what did happen the next day?
Yeah, well, he went before two justices of the peace that day when he went into the RCMP. And then I quickly spoke to him that night, and he said he was staying overnight because he had to go before a judge in the morning. And so he slept at the RCMP that night. He said it was cold. And then we had people from our church calling the courthouse trying to figure out when's his trial, when is he standing before this judge, and they kept telling us, like, he's not here, he had already left. And then one of our elders came behind the courthouse and actually saw them taking him out in ankle and wrist cuffs, treating him like a criminal. And his comment to me when he called me, because I was trying to get to him, he was trying to see me because they were detaining him. And so he's like, honey, I'm trying to see you. So I'm driving to, the RCMP, and I'm within 15 minutes, but his comment to me was, honey, they shackled me. And that really affected him. And so I said, okay, I'm getting there. I'm getting to the RCMP. I'm driving right now. And then when I arrived there, they had told me he wasn't there, that he had already left. And so, I just didn't see him after that.
So what has happened in the meantime? Am I understanding that he's in isolation? But is it because he's an outsider coming into the facility and they have a rule that any new person has to be in the 14-day COVID quarantine, or is there something more to it than that?
I have to believe that it's just COVID quarantine. They did put him on a unit today. I spoke with him tonight, and they moved him to a unit. So, but up until today, he was only allowed out of his cell for 2 15-minute blocks. And so he was trying to call me on those blocks when he wasn't showering. If he showered, he would just call me and tell me he loved me, and then he'd hang up the phone. But our calls were ranging anywhere from 2 minutes to 16 minutes, and just never sure when he was going to call me. So, and then he was a little bit hungry. He didn't have his canteen, which apparently you have to buy to get extra snacks and stuff like that. So he was hungry for the first probably week and a bit that he was there. He was by himself. I think after 3 days, I think he was by himself after that for about a week and a half.
So are you going to be, let's assume that he doesn't get bail tomorrow because they've moved the hearing over to tomorrow. Are you going to be able to see him after tomorrow?
I'll only be able to see him via video for a 30-minute call. I have to clarify whether it's every 2 days or whether it's twice a week. And I'm guessing that's going to be based on availability of cameras. I have to drive to the West End to see him, but no, I can't see him live.
Why not?
The COVID restrictions.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
Erin, I'm going to just let everybody soak on what you've told us, because it's bananas. There's no other way to describe this. And we're going to see if we can get into some of the legal matters with John Carpay, Executive Director of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom. John, I don't even know quite what to say here. We started, before you joined us, we talked about this child sex molester who was released a few days ago with a warning to the community that he was in danger of reoffending. Erin mentioned that 50 other hardened criminals were also released because of COVID issues, and yet they're cracking down on Pastor James Coates. What am I missing here?
None of this makes very much sense. The other interesting thing is that the owner of the Whistle Stop, a cafe or Whistle Stop restaurant in Mirror, Alberta, he openly defied the government and said we're not complying with these health orders. We're going to stay open. You can find me. I don't care how much money you find me. We're going to stay open. And he is not in jail. And so, you know, there's no rhyme or reason to it. I think that the government cracks down hard on people that have courage and conviction and principle. And when you stand up and say no, and quite reasonably, and I was really this first time actually I haven't spoken with Mrs. Coates before, and a lot of new details for me. The lawyer on the file is James Kitchen, but he's been so busy that we've kind of carved it up, and I'm doing the media stuff and he's doing all the legal stuff. But it's just I think when you stand up and say no, you know, we're only going to go so far, and the church obviously has complied to a very large extent with all kinds of things, but everybody's got their own line in the sand, and there's a certain point where you say, yeah, I'll comply with A, B, and C, and that's reasonable, but now you're asking for D, E, and F, and that's not reasonable, and I'm not doing it. And so I think Pastor Coates is a hero. It's people like him that make the difference in creating justice in a country, because unless and until somebody says no to an unjust law or an unjust demand, unless and until that happens, the injustice just, at best, it stays at the same level, but it usually gets worse. It reminds me, if I can digress a little bit, of the pro-life students at the University of Calgary who were threatened with expulsion from the university, which is a very serious threat. If you're a university student, if you get expelled, you're not going to be getting into other universities, and you're basically kissing your career goodbye if you want to become a doctor, lawyer, teacher, accountant, pharmacist. I mean, the list of professions for which you need a university degree is very long. And these students defied the university justly and legally, and they continued to express their pro-life views on campus. And the university did, in fact, find the students guilty of non-academic misconduct, punish them with a warning, and that if they continued, the penalties would escalate to expulsion. We took the university to court, and the court ruled against the university, and now we've got a good precedent. It hasn't solved all the problems, but at least it's a good precedent for partly solving the problems. Would never have happened without the courage of those students who said no to an unjust demand. And here we have health orders that are not scientific, they're not constitutional. James Kitchen mentioned during the hearing earlier today, he said, you know, the government claims that churches, and Grace Life in particular, but that churches are, you know, this serious threat to public health, and they haven't produced any evidence to back that up. It's just an assertion.
And probably just that one of the anecdotes that I relayed a little bit earlier. And it's interesting as well, because talk about exceptions. Remember when the niece of Ralph Klein also opened her hair salon, and she certainly didn't end up in jail either. I can only imagine what would have happened if they'd tried that. So let's talk about some of the legalities here, because this is the real challenge that we have. And we've talked about this before, is we're all sitting here thinking, isn't there a Charter of Rights and Freedoms? Isn't religious freedom and freedom of conscience, aren't they the first couple of enumerated freedoms in there? Do public health acts quash the Charter? Does the Charter no longer exist? How come we don't have any of this being adjudicated through that lens? Why hasn't that occurred?
Well, for one, it takes time to follow the court actions and to get the rulings. The Justice Centre has proceeded kind of cautiously on this, in the sense that when the measures were first introduced, and maybe this is the same for Grace Life, when back 12 months ago in March of 2020, we didn't know what we know today. And so there was, you know, a real possibility that maybe this is an unusually deadly killer that's going to kill millions and millions and millions of people, and it's going to be like the Spanish flu, or it's going to be, you know, inflict permanent health damage on large numbers of young people. Maybe it's going to kill a lot of children. And in that situation, you know, it's quite reasonable for the government to say, okay, you know, we're closing the schools, we're closing the borders, and we did not object to that. And but after 2 or 3 months, and especially when simple questions were not getting answered, like, have you thought about mental health damage? Have you thought about suicide? Have you thought about drug overdoses? Have you thought about how many people are going to die because you canceled 20,000 surgeries in Alberta alone, 200,000 canceled across Canada? Have you thought about the impact of people with cancer that are not getting diagnosed with the MRIs and the CT scans? And I could go on and on and on. And yet no response to these questions from the Alberta government or any other government. They're not looking at the harms. They're not even thinking about it. And this ties in with the charter, because the charter says, in a nutshell, and there's a complicated 4-part test, the Oakes test, but skip that for now. In a nutshell, what the charter requires is that whenever governments violate any of our rights and freedoms, and that could be religion, conscience, expression, peaceful assembly, association, your right to not get locked up in a jail, anytime rights and freedoms are violated, the onus is on the government to show that these laws and policies are actually going to bring about more good than harm. And 2 or 3 months into lockdowns, governments have not, and they are not showing that the lockdowns are bringing about more good than harm. And so they're failing under the charter. And legally, in my view, they should lose in court. But, anybody who makes a prediction about a court ruling is a fool. So I'm not going to make any predictions. But the great thing about the court actions is, even if we lose for the very first time, Dina Hinshaw is going to be cross-examined, and she's going to have to answer some questions, and not the softballs that she's been getting from mainstream media in the past 11 months.
Did we lose Danielle?
Did we lose Danielle? So,
can I be her co-host?
Hey, I'm in the show. It says I'm in the show. Am I in the show? I'm hearing you. Goodness.
Hey,
You're back.
Can you hear me now? I think I was backstage.
I was going to start asking questions.
So yeah, we'll turn it over to you, Erin. You're awesome at this because you've had a lot of experience doing a lot of these interviews. You're really so poised, and I don't know if I would be as poised as you are under the circumstances. How are you getting counsel and support right now? Or do you feel like you've got a good group of people around you? This is a hard conversation to have, and I just want to be sensitive to that.
Yeah, I have the most phenomenal people in the world around me. My elders have really stepped up to care for us as a family. Our whole church has stepped up to take care of us as a family, which is so different for us because James and I are so used to serving them, and it's our life of service towards them. So now that I'm on the receiving end of that, it's a little overwhelming, but just to see that the love and the care that they have taken care of us is so wonderful. And I'm getting messages from all around the world of people just praying for us and encouraging us. And so I just really sense that God is using that in my life to help me through these interviews and be able to say what I need to say and helping James get out.
See, I told you before, I'm not particularly religious. I'm a lapsed Catholic. Maybe I should go to your church. Maybe with the singing and the fellowship, maybe I'll reconsider that. But have you been getting a lot of support from those? Is it mostly your church community, or have you been getting support from those who are libertarian or not aligned or atheist or agnostic or non-believers? How is the support coming into you?
There's tons of support from all around the world. I think I looked at a binder on our administrator's desk, and it was about this thick just of that week of encouraging emails. Yeah, I would say the community, those who don't believe in God and don't go to church, I'd say they're divided. There are those who understand now. We wouldn't say we're primarily fighting for rights. We would say we're primarily fighting for Christ's lordship over his church and James's responsibility and our elders' responsibility to shepherd Christ's sheep. But we understand that the secondary cause of that is fighting for freedom. And so I think people see that we are fighting for freedom just through that. And so, yeah, we've had divided comments. There have been great support from people who don't believe in God.
Let's then talk about, so that's the theological argument. How do you make the argument for religious freedom in this context in the court, John? Like, what is the nature of the of the challenge going to be? Because I guess there's a few things that I'm confused about. One is why this pastor and no one else? Why this situation and none of the others? What about Section 176 of the Criminal Code? The Premier sort of scoffed at me when I mentioned it, but it looked pretty clear to me, like you're not allowed to arrest somebody to prevent them from doing a church service, and that kind of seems to be what they're doing here. What about I think James Kitchen, the lawyer, made the argument today that even if he's found guilty in May, jail is not the penalty. And so there's so much going on here that it's perplexing. I'm trying to understand the legal case that they're going to make, and then I want to know what your challenge to it is going to be. So that's a big question, but see if you can walk us through some of it.
Well, one of your questions is why James Coates, and I don't know. An educated guess might be that he's one of the only pastor in Alberta, or one of very few that was not fully complying with the restrictions. So that could be a reason, but that still doesn't answer why the owner of Whistle Stop is not in jail and other restaurants. In terms of the legal test in court, the government can place reasonable limits on reasonable restrictions on religion, and I can give you two extreme examples. If there was some Satanist cult that was engaging in ritual child abuse or something, the government should appropriately step in. Or if there's a religion that called for human sacrifice, the government could step in. So there are reasonable limits, and I'm not aware of anybody who really disputes that. The legal test in court is that when the government places restriction on, well, let's take Grace Life, for example. So if there's restrictions on singing or how many people can gather, and other things that impact how they practice their faith and how they worship God. First of all, the first component is it has to be because of a serious, pressing objective. And here, I know views are divided, but I would say, looking at Statistics Canada, which tells us that the death rate in Canada in 2020 was very much in line with the death rate in 2019, 2018, 2017. If it was true that COVID was really this unusually deadly killer, you would see a higher death rate in Canada in 2020. We don't see that. So
will the court consider that? Because I guess this is the thing, is the deference the court is showing to health authorities. I don't know if it's because we just haven't seen it tested. I don't know if you can comment on what you might have learned from what happened in British Columbia, because they closed the churches down. That's, I think, what the Premier says. Well, at least we haven't closed the churches down. Yeah. But I think when it went to court, the judge said, so where's the affidavit from Dr. Bonnie Henry? Where's her rationale? What's her thinking behind this? And she hadn't filed one. They basically said, well, go and back, judge, and look at her press conferences. And that's her justification, which seems pretty lame and disrespectful to the court, frankly. But give me your sense of where we're at. Is it the deference to, we're just going to assume that because they gave a press conference that our charter rights don't exist and they have made just a case by declaration that it's reasonable? Or is there going to be a higher test than that? Is the court actually going to hold the health officials to account?
Well, we haven't seen it yet because the court actions were filed. I mean, the Alberta one was filed in, the Justice Centre sued the Kenney government in December. Manitoba was filed a little bit earlier. Manitoba will be the first one to be heard, and that's going to be at the end of April. What has not yet happened is the evidence being presented in court, and this is what I'm very excited about, because even if we lose, this will be the first time that the government can't just intimidate people and engage in fear mongering by way of a news conference, backed up by pro-lockdown biased media. They're going to have to put their chief medical officer up to be cross-examined. And this judge in BC is entirely correct. Shame on the BC government for not having Dr. Bonnie Henry, the chief medical officer of BC, actually file an affidavit. Because how it works in court is you can't go by press conferences. You actually need to present evidence, and very often affidavit is one of those. Dina Hinshaw has filed an affidavit in the Alberta court action, and she will be cross-examined. And that cross-examination, it might go on for days. and she's going to be asked every question about every lockdown harm and every scientific report. She's going to be asked to show us the science as to why she believes that asymptomatic people are spreaders of the virus, when we have medical experts, top-notch, world-renowned people that are going to testify that asymptomatic people are not significant spreaders of the virus. Dina Hinshaw is going to have to produce some science in court if she wants to persuade the court that asymptomatic people are spreading the virus. So it's all supposed to be based on evidence. And the case in BC is challenging. You have the total closure of all churches, while not just box stores, big box stores and liquor stores and cannabis stores, but even restaurants are open in BC. You can have 6 people sitting close together at a table without masks. And churches, even churches that were strictly complying with the health orders, have been shut down completely. And so we're challenging that. It's not a broad challenge against the lockdowns in their entirety. We might file that later in BC, we probably will. But the BC case right now is saying, look, you've got no medical or scientific basis for shutting down churches entirely.
And is ours, what is the nuance with this particular one in Alberta then? Are you challenging the lockdowns in their entirety?
Yes.
Aha.
So the arguments, and I think we do have a little bit of time. So the four points that the government has to prove. Firstly, there's a serious and pressing public policy concern. So the government's going to argue that COVID is an unusually deadly killer that we should all be afraid of, and we should take, very decisive, strong action. We're going to show data that tells us that no, COVID is real, but it's not the unusually deadly killer that the government makes it out to be. Second point, there has to be a rational connection between restriction and the benefit. So on that point, the government would have to back it up with science, that asymptomatic people are spreaders, because if asymptomatic people are not significant spreaders, well, bye-bye social distancing and bye-bye mask wearing, it just doesn't hold any water. The third point that the government has to comply with is to violate our freedoms as little as possible to achieve the objective. And we're arguing you've gone way too far. I mean, you're destroying the economy, forcing people into isolation, and just massively, you can't have both of your parents over for Christmas dinner. Although you could if they were divorced, right? Because then they'd be from 2 different households. You could have your divorced mom and dad come over for Christmas, but not if your parents are married. I mean, this is going way too far.
And the fourth one?
The fourth one is that the onus is on the government to show that these violations, these public health orders, are doing more good than harm. And so for the first time, the government's going to have to show in court, not just claim that lockdowns have saved lives. Because I've been hearing this for 11 months. Oh, without the lockdowns, way more people would have died. Well, if they say that in court, the judge is going to say, okay, where's the evidence? What's the basis for your claim that without lockdowns, way more people would have died? They have to back that up. They can't just use that as a slogan.
Okay, let me go back to Erin, because this sounds like a long haul, and it's a huge case that your husband's been willing to take on and be the test case for. But that could mean that you don't see him for a couple of months. Are you prepared for that? Is he prepared for that?
I think I have to be prepared for that. I mean, thankfully, I serve a God that is completely sovereign, and he cares about me. So anything he's calling me to walk through for him, I will do. I'll have to rely on him and rely on our body, and obviously be praying for my husband day in and day out, and have to deal with my children's hearts through it. But if I don't have a choice, so the only other option is for him to compromise and just capitulate on what he believes. And he can't. I will not be the wife that makes her husband compromise. That's awful.
So John, let's talk about what he would have to agree to do in order to be released. Because if I read one of the postings that you put online, he has to agree that he's not going to deliver any more sermons. Is that right? Or is it that he'll only deliver sermons if they fall within the parameters that he's been dictated to? Just explain to me what it is that he would have to commit to, so that we know why it's such a hard line.
I think my understanding is he would have to commit to full compliance with the health orders, 100% compliance. And I think if he agreed to comply 100%, he would be able to preach on Sundays. But then it would be compromising on just how irrational and unscientific and unjustified these measures are. And to his credit, he's not willing to do that. I would hope that if I was in his shoes, I would have that same courage and say, no, there's a line. I'm willing to do some certain forms of compliance up to a point. Yes, definitely. But there's a line where it's like, no, this is an unjustified violation of my freedoms. So in a nutshell, it's about full compliance as opposed to partial compliance, because as Erin outlined, the church has gone to great lengths to really do all kinds of things, but the church has a line in the sand where it's, no, like we're not gonna go past this line.
Well, and Erin, I want you to comment on that too, because I've heard you say this as well, is that your whole approach is let people decide. Like, you're asking people to make their own judgment. You're giving them actually a bit more dominion over themselves than the government's prepared to do. Why is that important in your faith? Tell us where you came to that conclusion.
Well, I think people need to be, everyone grows and learns at different rates. And I think people have to be convinced within their own mind that what they're doing is not sinning. So like in scripture, it says that we're not to neglect the gathering of the saints, but people have to be fully convinced, and we're willing to patiently work with people as they come to their different conclusions. But it's hugely important that we just understand you're an individual before God, and you will stand before him and give an account for your life, but you're also part of a body. So I think it's so important that people just have to be convinced in their own mind, and there's varying things that could undergird their decisions that we've decided we'll walk with them through. So,
all right, thanks for giving us that clarification. So let's then talk about the bizarre extremes that they've gone to with James, because to give him the impression, should I get my wife to drop me off? Can I drive there myself? To give the impression that he's only going to go down and get the formal processing and then be able to go home, and then to keep him there, put him in shackles, and not allow his wife to speak to him any more than 15 minutes twice a day for 2 weeks. Now only allowed video conference. As somebody, I think I saw a comment go up earlier, most people are collecting these tickets and using them for wallpaper. No one's having this kind of reaction. There's an Instagrammer who's kind of making it his personal mission to tell people how they can assert their rights to travel. Section 6.1 of the Charter and Section 14.1 of the Quarantine Act says they can't stick some foreign body up your nose. And he gets tickets and he leaves, and he helps others get tickets and leave. And so this is what I don't understand, is why didn't they just write him a darn ticket so that he could go back home? What's with all this rigmarole?
I can speculate. I mean, and this is purely hypothetical. If Pastor Coates had not turned himself in, I question whether the authorities, whether the Alberta government would have had the temerity to actually go in and go into the church on a Monday morning and arrest him, when there may have been, several staff members around to record that with their cell phones. And to me, it just looks like, something done kind of on the sly in darkness. No, that's pure speculation. I mean, maybe if he hadn't turned himself in, maybe they would have come to the church and they would have been willing to risk, international cell phone video footage of, here's an actual pastor getting arrested and handcuffed and taken away into the police cart, because governments don't like that kind of publicity. But at the same time, they want to crack down on anybody who's a leader and who's principled and who's saying no and who's standing up. They'll be the first people to get attacked and prosecuted and so on.
Okay, explain to me why I'm wrong that the criminal code section 176 doesn't apply here, because it does say in there you can't arrest somebody and prevent them from being able to deliver a sermon. And it's actually a potential 2 years in jail if you violate that. So why isn't someone taking a criminal code violation against Dr. Dina Hinshaw for authorizing this? Like, what am I missing about that provision in the criminal code? Because if it doesn't mean anything in this situation, then it doesn't mean anything at all.
I think you could make an argument that in the course of law enforcement, you might be required to break the law. I mean, if you were some undercover cop and you're trying to bust a drug ring or something, maybe there'll be situations where you have to smoke some marijuana to keep your undercover status or something, assuming marijuana was still illegal. But I don't see that justification here when they don't need to disrupt a church service. This is a huge problem. I know in Calgary we get one Catholic priest and a number of quite a few pastors. You've got kind of a harassment and almost borderline disrupting of church services, which is also a criminal code offense. And I see no need for it. I could see potentially there could be situations where law enforcement could break the law as part of the bigger picture of law enforcement. But there's nothing that stops the health authorities from issuing a ticket on a Monday morning. So it's I don't know, and I won't speculate as to to what extent is Dina Hinshaw directing this. My guess would be that she's not personally involved in making these local decisions about who gets persecuted or not. But there's something ugly going on inside Alberta Health Services when you've got this kind of aggressive takedown of one pastor. Again, in the absence of science and evidence, because the government has been. And Erin, you can correct me if the time is wrong, but I believe it's been 6 months that the government's been at your church and, being there on Sunday mornings. The government's had 6 months to come up with some credible evidence as to churches being super spreaders and asymptomatic people being spreaders and a full church actually causing public harm. They've had 6 months to come up with evidence, and they haven't produced any evidence. They're before the courts making this assertion, based on one anecdote that, once upon a time there was one church that was full and one person died. Well, that's not science. That's just anecdotal, and it shouldn't stand up in court.
So Erin, let me ask you that. How did you get on the government radar? Because they said that they've been working with you all this time, but there must have been an initial complaint, or why is it that they targeted you? Because as much as the Premier likes to say you're the only one that is violating the orders, I have a hard time believing that.
Yeah, and I think there's been churches in the news that prove that wrong, but somebody must have reported us around the end of November, because we have ministries that run during the week. So that's really when AHS started to press us, was the end of November, but we have been open since the beginning of July or end of June. And so they really just started to come in hard, and then showing up with the RCMP every week and putting a closure notice on our door, fining James, and just started to get more aggressive and more aggressive. They took him to court to up the ante of the consequences if we kept gathering. So yeah, it's been since the end of November is when I believe they first contacted us that somebody had complained that there was too many cars in the parking lot, which we would have been abiding by the 15% capacity at that point. So
weird. So it was a neighbor. They used the snitch line.
Yeah. So during the week, we were abiding by the capacity rules. So.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. What are the other pastors saying to you? The other churches saying to you? I gather, and I've only heard this secondhand. As I mentioned to you, I have somebody who's a listener whose daughter goes to your church. And it sounds like, and I don't know if this went ahead, it sounds like the Premier was having some faith leaders powwow at 5:00 today. I don't know if that went ahead or if you know anything about it, but is there some kind of coordinated effort to have other faith leaders? I know your husband doesn't call himself that, but to have other people with positions in churches to put some pressure on you to just give in?
Yeah, there's been some requests for James to call various pastors that I heard was a requested call. He's also received pressure from other members of parliament to back down. And they just don't understand it. He can't. It's his conscience. This isn't a political move for him. This is his obedience before God, and he takes that very seriously. He knows he's going to be judged for the souls that have been entrusted to him with that stewardship. And so when it comes to a man telling you to shut building versus the eternal God who bought you with his own blood, that's a terrifying reality for him, and he does not want to meet him in court. That's not an option for him.
Okay, so John, what is the maybe you can help us understand, those who are watching who might not have religious conviction. Why is freedom of religion and freedom of conscience, why is it enshrined in the charter anyway? It seems like people are looking at it as being outdated, old-fashioned, it doesn't apply in this situation, can be overridden. What's the importance of that? Why was it put in there in the first place?
Well, freedom of conscience is broader, and it applies to everybody. So let's say that you had a conscientious belief that it's wrong to kill an animal. It's always wrong to kill an animal. If there's a government law or a government policy that directly or indirectly requires you to kill animals or participate in it, it's a bizarre example. It's not a good one. I can't think of a law that forces people to kill animals. But a conscientious belief.
I can, because they were killing grizzly bears and bear cubs and abandoned black bear cubs, and a conservation officer refused to kill them, and he actually got disciplined for it. So there would be an example. Continue.
Okay, so there's an example. Yeah, that conservation officer, if his conscience told him it's always wrong to kill an animal, we have to deal with this problem in a way other than killing the animal. We cannot do this. Then what the government's supposed to do is say, okay, well, we'll find somebody else to shoot the grizzly bear. There's supposed to be respect for that. Again, within reason, right? You can't say, well, my conscience, says that I have to run around and rob gas stations or something, right? This is subject to reason and to sincerity and so forth. But freedom of conscience means that the government should not be forcing you to do something you believe is fundamentally wrong. Practical example would be assisted suicide in healthcare. Mm-hmm. There are lots of non-religious doctors who interpret the Hippocratic Oath that it's just, you do not help people to commit suicide. You ease their suffering, you help them in other ways, but you do not assist with suicide, right? So that could be religious or non-religious, or okay. So the government has an obligation to say, okay, if you have that conscientious belief as a doctor, then you should not be pressured directly or indirectly to help people to commit suicide. If it's a government objective to provide assisted suicide, the government has to go to a point of hardship to find other people to help with carrying out assisted suicide.
But why does that matter? Is it because we have a foundation for where does the foundation for those rights come from? Do they come from the Bible? Is there a biblical strain there? Is that why we enshrined those things in the Constitution or in the Charter? Is it the founding of our nation because we had to deal with Protestants and Catholics who were fighting, and we needed to make sure that one didn't force the other to do something they didn't want to do? I guess I'm trying to understand are these rights that stand the test of time, or can the court just say, they don't matter in this circumstance?
Well, the rights and freedoms that we have, I think, by way of history and by way of tradition, they do originate. They originate in religion, although there's lots of atheists that are militant, fervent supporters of the same rights and freedoms. So it's not religious per se. But most of the democracies, and I think Japan would be an exception, but most of the democracies in the world, they do come from Christian cultures, and it's within a Christian culture that the rights and freedoms emerged and blossomed. And I'm saying that as a matter of historical truth. And so it's within that culture that the idea came about that we are free people and we have dignity, and part of our freedoms include the freedom to worship and to choose one's religion, the freedom to live out your life according to your conscientious beliefs, religious or not, the freedom of expression to say what you want in a peaceful manner. It doesn't include rioting and looting and setting buildings on fire, but to speak whatever you want, to associate with whomever you want, to assemble peacefully. So those are all the Charter Section 2 freedoms. And then there's another fundamental freedom that's not in the charter, that is to use and enjoy your own property, the fruit of your labor, to use your own home, your own business, to run your own business, to earn a livelihood. And earning a livelihood is in the charter. So I always see them as a bundle. I think, if you can't, in my view, you can't take away freedom of religion and hope that the rest is going to function okay, or you can't take away freedom of expression and hope that the rest of the freedoms will do okay. I think it's a seamless garment, and I think that the freedom to practice your religion, and that's not just inside your own home, but outside of your home and in your life and at your place of worship, the freedom to practice your religion is just as important as your freedom to express your opinions and to associate and to assemble.
I wonder, Erin, if you can put some sort of emotion around that, because I part of the reason I'm doing these Western Standard Onlines is I had a crisis of conscience in the mainstream media, that there was a whole range of issues that I didn't feel I could fully explore and talk about. I felt like there's sort of a mainstream narrative and we're not allowed to have these conversations. And there's a lot of deplatforming, and literally I wasn't sleeping at night for about 6 months. So I understand viscerally the importance of living consistent with your own conscience and values. And I wonder if you can describe what it would mean for you or for your husband if he was forced to compromise on this. What would it do?
Well, I think it would just severely limit, how we worship God first and foremost, but how he cares for the people that have been entrusted to him. So he's not only the main teaching pastor at Grace Life Church, he's a member of Grace Life Church. And so the way the Bible talks about us is that we've all been given spiritual gifts to serve one another and to love one another. And so for him not to be able to be free to do that that's heartbreaking for him. Not only would he be disobeying God, but he wouldn't be loving the people who have been entrusted to him, that he's to care for and to shepherd and to love. So that's his highest priority, is loving the people that make up Grace Life Church and all of the souls that comprise her. We have eternity in view and caring for her eternal soul. So,
this is maybe the difficulty that non-religious people have in understanding what you've just said, is that we're living in a state of fear of dying. We're living in a state of fear of a virus. We're living in a state of fear that, oh my gosh, I could be that exception. I could be the 1 in 100,000 49-year-old women who, I still have 1 more month before I'm 50, guys. 49-year-old women with no health conditions who weirdly end up having the worst manifestation of it and die. And I think that is a paralyzing fear for the vast majority of society. I don't feel that. I've never felt fear about this virus because I had a pretty good handle on who was most at risk. And I determined very early that I was not in a high risk category. But maybe you can talk about why that is not the number one consideration in your congregation, that like maybe you've got a healthier view of mortality and illness and death than those of us who are in a sort of a non-religious sphere. Can you talk about that a bit? Because I heard an interview where you did mention that we're sort of creating this paralyzing fear of viruses, and creating that normalcy for kids is so that they don't run around for the next 40 years with a paralyzing risk of viruses. So can you comment on that a bit?
Well, I think, again, I believe in a God who's sovereign, and in Scripture in Psalm 139, it says that he's numbered our days. And so he knows when we're going to be born and when we're going to die. I think that there is a legitimate fear out there with the virus, but we believe that there's an even greater fear in regards to people's souls, that they have to consider that God is a judge and they will stand before him, and that Jesus Christ's death and resurrection is the only way to be reconciled to the Father. And living for him now and in eternity. So we don't just care about the physical aspect, we care about the eternal aspect. And so for us, it's more important for us to tell people you have an eternal soul, and that soul is important. When you die, you're not just annihilated. You will stand before God and give an account for your life. And that's where we believe that Jesus Christ is the one who died the perfect death as a sacrifice for sinners, and that through his resurrection, he reconciles people back to God by repentance and faith. And so that's our main concern is the whole person, which most importantly is their eternal soul.
So, John, I guess this is going to be something you'll have to argue in court. So I think Erin sort of put out there the theology of how she approaches her faith. But isn't the government going to come back and say, yeah, but there's lots of Christian denominations who feel exactly the same way about their service to God and to Jesus, and they've been able to live within these rules. So this church should have been able to live within these rules. Does that matter? Is it because the majority has decided they can do it this way, you should too? Help us understand the legal argument.
Well, I think the government would be foolish to bring that argument forward because it was rejected by the Supreme Court of Canada in a case out of Quebec called Absalom. And at issue there was it was Orthodox Jews that wanted Succoth. It was a hut that the Jews are required to build, and the condo board didn't want these things on the balcony. And at one point in the lower courts, the government brought in different rabbis, and there were some rabbis that said, well, Judaism doesn't actually require this. And the Supreme Court ruled, it doesn't matter, even if 90% of Jewish rabbis say that this is not a bona fide requirement of Judaism. For these particular Jews, for these particular Orthodox Jews, it was a requirement for them that they had to build sort of a hut type of thing on their balcony for 2 or 3 weeks a year. And so what matters is that Pastor Coates, in his religious faith, believes that the health orders have gone too far. So I don't think the government, if they try to raise that, I think that would be a dumb move on their part. So it doesn't matter, even if Pastor Coates was the only Christian pastor in Alberta who rejected the full compliance with these health orders, that's good enough to make a religious freedom claim. But I want to get back real briefly to ask a really good question about, why should this matter to non-religious people? Mm-hmm. And a two-part answer. One is that you don't have to be religious to believe that we are not merely physical beings, but we have a mind and a spirit and a soul. And I don't think you can argue that lockdowns are not having a massively destructive impact on our minds, souls, and spirits. In fact, the lockdowns seem to be predicated on this materialistic belief that the only thing that matters is our physical bodies, which is itself is a religious belief. If you believe that the only thing that matters is your physical body, that too is a religious belief. The second thing is, in terms of this seamless web thing, I would say if there are atheist people or non-religious people that are, not really too fond of whatever Pastor Coates and his church want to do on a Sunday morning, I would say if you allow the government to crush that church, who's going to be there for you when the government wants to permanently say you can never have people over for Christmas or Thanksgiving? You have to social distance forever. You have to have your kids masked and living in fear forever. So it's a seamless web. If you allow religious freedom to get crushed, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because that just empowers the government to more aggressively go after freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of peaceful assembly, private property rights, et cetera.
Now, I know that I think Corey Morgan has joined us because Derek had another obligation. And so, Corey, if you're listening, here's the challenge when you're doing a televised. This is kind of why I like podcasts and radio, because you can have breaks where you can look at all of the text coming in and you can identify some questions that you want to pose to your guests. And you're also able to look at the text screen without having to worry about your fact that you're not looking in the camera. So that's my way of asking Corey if he wants to come on and identify any questions that have come through. And there's tons of comments that are coming in. And so I know that they've been flashing up on the screen. But Corey, if you want to join us so that I still have questions I can ask, but I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything important from the audience. So let's continue on with what happens now, because I don't understand what it is the government has to gain from going through this process. John, the way you described it, you're going to skewer them, because I've seen the stats as well as you have. And the 4 cases that they're going to have to make. You're going to have a counter argument for. Why would they want this to be adjudicated in court? Why wouldn't they just give him his bail, maybe give him a $50,000 fine if they want to be crazy about it and say, we showed you? But why would they want this to go to a trial? I don't understand why they're not just backing down on this.
It could be just, once people have committed to a course of action and they've invested a lot in it, we've seen politicians of all parties in all provinces and federally, with few exceptions. I mean, Maxime Bernier, and you've got, Drew Barnes, anti-lockdown MLA, and some others. But by and large, every politician on both the government side of the House and the opposition side of the House, they've all pushed this narrative that we're dealing with an unusually deadly killer. Lockdowns are the way to go, even though this has never been tried before in human history, to lock down a healthy population rather than quarantining the sick. Nevertheless, without any historical precedent, lockdowns are the way to go. We've saved lots of lives. Lockdown harms aren't all that bad, and the benefits are worth it. And once you've committed to that for 11 months, and that's been your public policy, it would take an astronomical amount of humility to back off and say, and Jason, to his credit, did back off. He said in the fall, he kind of hinted that, maybe we've made a mistake here. We've gone too far. We've caused too much economic damage. We're not going back this way. He was saying the right things. Like I was shocked and happy at some of the things he was saying. That takes a lot of humility. But, for a government to back down at this stage, I mean, to admit that asymptomatic people don't spread the virus, to admit that the virus is not, nearly as deadly as what's been claimed, to admit that lockdowns have caused far more harm than good, an astronomical amount of humility would be required. And so I think there's a strong commitment to the narrative. I think it's a moving train. And I think a lot of media people would need the same kind of humility to say, oh, gee, we really weren't asking tough questions that we should have asked.
I've got a number of people wondering what the end game is here. Like, how do you think this is going to turn out? Because my great fear is that he's denied bail tomorrow again, and he sits imprisoned until May 3rd, 4th, 5th. And then I don't even know what happens at that point. At what point does he get released?
Well, if we lose tomorrow, it's the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench. We can appeal that to the Alberta Court of Appeal. And typically, bail matters are heard quite quickly. So you're not looking at a 6-month or 12-month delay. So we might be able to put that before the Court of Appeal in short order if we get a bad ruling tomorrow morning. But I mean, the trial coming up, it'll be interesting to see if the government does not just simply withdraw the charges and withdraw the tickets, because at that trial, May 3rd to 5th, we're going to demand that the government show all the evidence, and we're going to subpoena Dina Hinshaw to come and be part of the trial of James Coates. And it'll be interesting to see if the government still wants to go ahead with the trial when they actually get pushed to show the evidence at that trial.
And Erin, what are you hoping comes of this? Like, tell us how best case scenario that this plays out for you.
Best case scenario is he gets released tomorrow and they lift the restrictions off churches, and churches can decide from there how they want to conduct themselves. That's the best case scenario.
And is that likely to happen, John? I mean, this is the thing, is that that's exactly what happened in the restaurant situation. And it's exactly what happened in the hair salon situation. We're now down at the lowest that we've been since this latest surge. I think before I came on, I looked, we're at 247 cases in hospital and 47 in ICU. So we're down, we're approaching the level of 150, which is supposed to, we're supposed to be getting to stage 4 pretty soon based on these numbers. So it should be fairly easy for them to do exactly what they had done in the case of those other two examples. And I don't know, why wouldn't they do that?
Well, you've just raised two other issues that the government's going to have to answer for in court. One of them is the PCR tests, which are not designed to diagnose COVID, which have a high false positive rate. And the government's going to have to explain in court why they're relying on PCR tests in the first place when they are not the gold standard. The other related issue, the government's been fear-mongering for 11 months about overcrowded hospitals, as though hospitals in Canada have never been overcrowded in the last 20 or 30 years, or at least the last several years. I mean, this is outrageous. To pretend that Canadian hospitals are overcrowded because of COVID is intellectually dishonest. And the government's going to have to explain in court why they're pushing that kind of fear-mongering when it's normal, not good, but normal for many hospitals to be overwhelmed and overrun. And hallway medicine has been the norm in Canadian hospitals for years. And then trying to say, oh, it's because of COVID, they'll have to answer for that in court.
Well, in fact, I know Western Standard did a news story on an access to information request about ICU capacity. I'll see if I can post that on my locals account a little bit later, but it actually showed that the capacity of ICUs was lower than what we had seen in the 2 previous years. And so if the argument is that ICUs were overwhelmed, the data doesn't even make the case for it. So what are the implications though, John? Like, I guess I'm worried that the court, are they prepared to look at this hard evidence? Are they prepared to go through? I'm just trying to understand precedents that have been set in the past, because there have been all kinds of cases that come before the court where they are deferential to government. And I'm just wondering if they're going to take the argument seriously that you put forward, or is it, oh, well, it's a public health emergency, and so there's going to be a different set of rules?
Well, a fair-minded judge will look at the evidence, and his or her judgment is going to contain a review of the evidence. And so it's kind of hard. I'm not saying we're guaranteed to win. I mean, you never know what's going to happen in court. But the court ruling would explain and describe what is the government's evidence that they've put forward to suggest that this is really this unusually deadly killer that warrants all kinds of extreme measures that violate charter freedoms. And they'll have to look at evidence that we put forward on the defense side that says, well, no, you look at Statistics Canada, even Alberta data. I mean, what are we up to now? The Alberta data is something like 2.5% of the people that have died with COVID did not have any pre-existing health conditions. 75% of the people who died of COVID had 3 or more serious illnesses like cancer and emphysema and heart disease and so on. So the court's going to look at the evidence and on all of these issues, on PCR testing, on hospitals supposedly being overrun, on how lethal COVID actually is compared to what we've been told, how effective the mask wearing and social distancing actually are, whether asymptomatic people are actual spreaders of the virus. All of these issues, the government's going to have to not just say, oh, if you disagree with us, you're just a Neanderthal and you're uneducated and you're not scientific, because we've got the science on our side. That's what they're saying now. Well, in court, they're going to have to show the science.
I guess there's great peril. You talk about they'd have to have great humility, but there's the real danger they're going to have humiliation. If they have this all played out in court, wouldn't that kind of indicate that, I mean, that gives a forum for people to question everything we've been told over the last year. That creates great peril for the government if what we've been told doesn't mesh with the facts that you put forward. And I don't know why they would want to risk the credibility of their senior health officials. I don't know why they'd want to risk the credibility of their government. I don't know what they'd want to risk the credibility of the health system. It seems like a huge risk. And so this is why I don't understand. There's something I'm missing here, John.
Well, it gets back to being heavily invested in something, right? If you've put, think about your personal life, you've put a lot of investment into a relationship or into a mutual fund or into a career or into whatever, right? It's really hard to let go when you're invested in something. So there's a huge investment, because indeed, if the health orders are struck down in full or in part, it does call into question, has government been truthful with us for the past 11 months? But I should also say, though, it's not that black and white in court. You could get a court ruling that says, well, we still accept that COVID is pretty scary and pretty deadly. However, some of these restrictions have gone too far. And so there might not be that necessarily that degree of victory on our side or degree of humiliation on the other side. You could get a court ruling that says, well, you know, we accept some of the government's points. We think COVID really is dangerous. However, some of these measures are not based on science and evidence, and they can strike down measures in part. And so that's also, you know, it's not just win or lose. There could be a mixed ruling in that fashion that could be forthcoming.
I'm going to make a prediction because last year in May was when we started easing the restrictions. So there is going to be some easing of the restrictions that happen after this sort of April 30th end of the spring break traveling season, which everybody seems to be geared towards. So I'm trying to figure out the different avenues that this could potentially go. Could they at any point say we're dropping the charges? I think the thing that comes to my mind is Edward Maurice. He was initially he was charged, I think, with firearms offenses because he was trying to defend his home when someone broke in, and he ended up shooting the person who broke into his home. But they ultimately made the decision to drop the case. And so that looks like it had some political intervention, whether it was a Crown prosecutor or Casey Madhu, because I think that happened just after Casey Madhu became the justice minister. Couldn't there be a political intervention on the part of Casey Madhu to end this case now? Well,
then I suppose so, but we have to be careful of what we wish for. Because we do want a society that is subject to the rule of law, and so there should not be, as a general principle, there should not be political interference in a decision to prosecute or a decision not to prosecute. We saw that with Trudeau in the SNC Lavalin and what's her name, the MP from Vancouver, Jody
Wilson-Raybould.
Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was, and I'm just going from memory here, but was basically told, you know, you need to stop the prosecution of SNC Lavalin.
This is what I'm saying, though. I'm not asking Premier Kenney to make that decision because that would be the political interference. Remember, it was always it's her decision, hers alone. So Casey Madhu, does he have, as Attorney General and Justice Minister, does he have the authority, if he doesn't think this is a winnable case, does he have the authority to say, we're not going to pursue this? Because ultimately, when you think of what happened there, the prosecutors in the SNC Lavalin case decided to plead with a company, they pled guilty to a lesser charge, and the company got completely let off the hook. So there is a lot of latitude to resolve these cases, as long as it's being done internally within the department. So I hate the buck passing. That's what I'm upset about, is that you talk to the premier and you say, oh, it wasn't me, it was Dina Hinshaw. I talked to Dina Hinshaw, oh, it wasn't the Alberta Health Services. That was just the RCMP. Well, it wasn't the RCMP, it's the court putting these provisions in. Someone's got to be pinned down on this, and somebody's got to be responsible for it. So in my view, there should be some role for the politicians to step in and say, whoa, this has gone way too far. This is not where we're heading. We don't think we're going to get a conviction. We're sorry, no harm, no foul. You're right. We're backing out of this.
Well, it's an excellent question. I think the two criteria that prosecutors are supposed to look at is the prosecution in the public interest, and is there a likelihood of conviction? And as you pointed out, Danielle, a prosecutor can very legitimately not prosecute if there's a belief that there's no likelihood of conviction, right? Because then you're wasting resources on other prosecutions where there is a likelihood of conviction. If charges are withdrawn, if the prosecution is stayed, then it's got to be done for the right reasons, and it can't be because of public opinion, because that's contrary to the rule of law. Having said that, they're a little bit between a rock and a hard place, because they have, not that I have much sympathy for them, but they are between a rock and a hard place that they've put themselves into. Because if on the one hand, if you say that COVID is an unusually deadly killer, and all these lockdown restrictions and violations of our charter freedoms are truly necessary, and they're helpful and they're effective, if that's really your position, then how can you logically and consistently not enforce the law and not prosecute, right? So I think that's kind of the rock and the hard place position that they've put themselves into.
Okay, I saw someone pop up a little bit earlier asking, what's the worst case scenario for Pastor Coates? Because I think that this has a pretty a large chance of it being the worst case scenario for the government. But let's look at the other extreme. What happens if they throw the book at him? What does that look like?
I don't know. I ought to know this. I'm sorry. I don't know what the penalty is, but I don't think it's jail time. I think it's just fines. I'm not sure if you can be. I think apart from being in contempt of court, where the government has obtained an injunction to shut down a church, and then the church still defies the injunction and doesn't abide by it, then you could have a scenario where the church members are in contempt of court because there's a specific court injunction that says that a particular church must be closed. But apart from an injunction proceedings, I think all the government can do is levy fines. And, Erin would know if there's been injunction proceedings against the church. I mean, I don't think that's the case.
Well, let's ask Erin about that, because I think what we're now all worried about is what happens to the rest of your congregation. What happens to the others who've stepped in to take his place and they're continuing to hold the services? Do you get any sense that sometimes government goes a step too far and then they realize, whoopsie, we can't do that again. And I'm trying to figure out if there's been enough blowback on them from enough people in Alberta saying, this is not what we elected you to do, that there's some hesitancy, or if they're emboldened, if they think they're winning this argument with public opinion. I would think you'd be on the front lines of seeing and observing how you're being treated now by the authorities. What's your sense of it? Are we going to see more arrests and more incarcerations?
I really don't know. I hope not. I know that there are churches that open Sunday and a few more that are planning on opening. I know in BC there is that churches are going to be opening on the 14th. I know that there's churches open in Ontario. There is the Liberty Coalition, and I believe I counted over 100 churches across Canada, which is not that much, that are opening. So people are slowly opening their doors, and it's so unfortunate. The majority of comments that I get are from people from BC that are just hurting people, and they need to be with other human beings, and this has been taken away from them. So the majority of emails I get are from people just really hurting in BC because their lockdown measures have been so extreme. But I really don't know. I wasn't really expecting them to jail my husband in the first place. So, and I don't know why they would have put that restriction in place, knowing that he's unwilling to give up the gathering. To put that restriction in place and think he would sign it is just baffling to me.
All right. So I have a lot of people saying, especially after hearing John's argument, that this isn't just a narrow argument about freedom of religion. Your husband's the test case for the whole shebang and the whole approach. And I think that there's probably something to be said for, yes, justified with extreme restrictions March, April. As we've gone along, maybe not as much. And as we're in the situation that we're in now, where we're on the cusp of reopening, becomes even more difficult. But I've got a lot of people here saying, we have to see this fought out in court. But that's your husband. We're sort of all saying, yeah, you go get him. But it's going to have a very real impact on you and him and your family and your kids. And I just want us to all be a little bit, I need to understand what that's going to look like for you if this is a much longer process.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think God is in control if that's what he's calling us to do. We're not revolutionaries. We're not freedom fighters. We're just trying to be obedient to God. That's it. And so we will do whatever he calls us to do. And if the secondary causes are freedoms in Alberta and hopefully across Canada, then I just have to be willing to do that out of love for my neighbor. But it is a sacrifice for sure for our family. This is detrimental to my children. It is very hard on our church. But I think we'll sacrifice if that's what God wants us to do. But again, that's not the primary reason that we're doing it.
So talk about the impact on your kids, because they are a little bit older. And so I want people to know sort of what your family environment is like, and tell us about how old they are and how they're perceiving what their dad's going through. Yeah,
I have an 18-year-old and an 11-year-old, and for them, what their dad is doing is not any different than how he's lived his life in obedience to Christ. He's always sacrificed himself for the church. He's always served other people. And so when they look at the situation, this isn't really, this is dad just being himself. Now that's obviously landed him in jail, and that's brought a lot of tears and hurt. But I think especially my oldest, he understands there's a bigger picture, and that he understands there's a work God needs to do in his own heart. And so they've been sitting under their dad's preaching for 11 years. I think they get as Christians that this is consistently what has happened to people in church history. And so we're not anything special. We're just trying to be faithful. But there's some tears. There's been some really not kind comments to my youngest child. And
can you elaborate on that? Are you able to say it without using cuss words, or like
sure.
what happened?
Well, they're children speaking to him, but you have kids telling you your dad deserves jail and he's broken the law. Your dad's killing people, that kind of stuff. Like we've been called murderers, and so it's just that kind of stuff. But it helps me to teach him, when somebody we know is carrying a burden or is hurt, it's not our job to sit back and evaluate, is that person's burden a burden I should be evaluating if I should carry or not? We just carry it for them. It doesn't matter how they got there. So this is really just giving the opportunity to teach my children how to love, and how to love in the face when people just don't understand what you're doing. So all of this is teaching opportunities for them. But it's hard. My youngest is starting to really feel the loss of his dad. Both my children have a wonderful relationship with their father, and he works from home. So we have access to him during the day. We homeschool our kids. So this is very different from that. James is he's a funny guy, and he makes all of these just loud noises, and he's always singing and making the dog get all riled up. And so when he's not home, it is eerily quiet in the house. So there's just adjustments that we're having to make, but I think they're okay. I think they understand that God is at work, and they have to trust him in that.
It's one thing to have 2 weeks, but it's going to be another if this drags out for another 2 months. Is there anything that you're asking for by way of assistance? Is there anything that you want people to do? I mean, I understand John Carpay's point that the court has to operate independently. That said, the reason why we have jury trials is because what the courts do have to pass muster with a jury of their peers. And I understand that this is split, but I'm wondering if there's some way that people can give you support, that they can persuade the government to, if Casey Madhu has the power to intervene. I'm just wondering what can be done here. Is it just a matter of playing it out?
Is that for me or for John?
It's for you. It's for you. I think people are wondering what they can do to help you. I mean, do you have a place where you receive texts and emails so that people can tell you that they're with you? I've got all kinds of emails and texts that are coming in here, people just saying they're with you. And I think that even if you saw some of that, it's tricky, right? Because you also get some of the negative when you're looking online at some of the comments. But how can people tell you that they're with you and they're supportive of you?
Our office at gracelife.ca is making a binder of just the encouragement for us so that we can go through that. And that just is enough to lift spirits. I mean, you can write the Edmonton Remand Center and write James to encourage him. I think somebody set up a GoFundMe, but we are not in need of finances right now. So we've been saying, if you want to donate to something, please donate to the JCCF. They have been doing our case pro bono and working really hard. So financially, our family is taken care of. So we don't have a need right now. And James is always the kind of person that when a need arises, then we take care of it. He doesn't tend to want stuff before you need it. So, and then write your MLAs, write your MPs, write Kenny, and just share your heart with them about the lockdowns, and I think start to put pressure on how, even letting them know your personal experience, how this has affected you, and write your pastors, let them know how this has affected you. And I think that's the best way to help right now.
All right, John, tell us a little bit more about your needs then, since Erin has said if anyone wants to make a contribution, it's to you. And as I said, we'll talk in a couple weeks' time about the full range of litigation that you're taking on, but give us an idea of what your needs are there.
Well, it's a privilege and an honor to have Pastor Coates as a client, and I've never met him, but I hope to at some point in the future. And I mean, the Justice Center is more busy than ever. We're actively looking to hire 4 more lawyers. We had a good interview with somebody yesterday, but that person can't start until September. And the generosity of Canadians has been great. And so we've got 9 full-time staff lawyers. We're going to hire another 4 as soon as possible. And we just appreciate support in, whatever amount. A lot of a big chunk of our annual budget comes in the form of $200, $100, $50 donations. That's a big chunk of our budget. And, of course, we also get larger, 1,000 or 10,000 as well. But yeah, so people that have been donating, thank you very much. I mean, it's because of your donations that, we've got James Kitchen representing Pastor Coates, and other staff lawyers are also involved in the same file. We've got 3 people, 3 out of 9 lawyers have extensive criminal law backgrounds. So, so James is also getting support and advice and assistance. We very much take a team approach to all of the cases. So if people want to donate, you can go online, www.jccf.ca. And we are a registered charity, and we do issue official tax receipts. So if that's important to you, that's a bonus. You'll get an official tax receipt sent to you in early 2022 for anything that you donate in 2021. One
more position I thought that you'd posted for, and I want to know if you filled it, is for somebody to be full-time fighting against lockdowns in the country. Tell us what the status is there.
It has, it's so frustrating. I've got so much on my plate. The Justice Center wants to move ahead with hiring 1 or 2 full-time or part-time staff. We want to expand staff more in the direction of advocacy. I mean, the legal side of it will always be, 90% of the organization. So that's, we're moving ahead on that, but we haven't started advertising for that yet. But we do want to hire more people to help out on the advocacy side, because we understand that much as the court actions are important, governments would not be locking us down and violating our charter rights and freedoms if there wasn't substantial public support for these measures. And that's the reality. And unless and until public opinion changes, we're going to be stuck with these horrible, destructive, suffering-inflicting measures for a very long time. And that one more point, and this ties in with it, if you've suffered because of the lockdowns, don't just complain to your friends and family, but phone your MLA or tell the MLA staff, I want to talk to my MLA. Share your story with your MLA about how a relative died because their surgery got canceled, or because your uncle's going to die of cancer because he didn't get his MRI on time, or how your life savings that you had invested in your business are totally destroyed. Because the MLAs need to hear from the anti-lockdown people, and they need to hear a lot more. So that's extremely important.
Absolutely. And there is, in my last newsletter, I mentioned COVID Common Sense is an organization that has started up. They've got a web presence, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and they're looking to collect those stories as well, because the province is just getting one side. And they're getting skewed poll results, because we keep getting told 80% of people not only like the lockdowns, but they want them harder, which I guess I'm in the wrong 20%, because that's not what my social circle is saying. Let me just finish with a final couple questions to Erin, because one of the things that you've said and your husband has said, and I played that quote earlier, is, maybe that you have to do some self-reflection about the amount of involvement you've had in politics and what should happen next. And you supported the UCP and Jason Kenney, and I'm just wondering how you feel now. Like, if I could choose one premier that I ever thought would be the premier the international community was talking about, having jailed a pastor, Jason Kenney would have been at the bottom of the list. I don't even know if this is happening anywhere else. It's stunning to me. And I'm just wondering how that has impacted your perception of politics.
Well, I do. I've had to evaluate, have I been negligent in the area of just knowing my rights, knowing our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, knowing our Alberta Bill and freedoms, and even going through this whole health order. Like I read today from an organization, they're called Police on Guard for Thee. And they are current and retired police officers that are really fighting for the freedoms of Canadians. And they had put in an article that they wrote about, James, that the health order that's put in place in Section 75 can trump any document except for the Alberta Bill of Rights. And so that was shocking to me, because our Alberta Bill of Rights gives us the freedom of worship and freedom of conscience. So it's just, I didn't know all these things. So I've had to evaluate, am I being negligent, and start to understand more, how does our country work? Because I think growing up in Canada, I never learned about this stuff in school, first of all. But I think growing up in Canada, there's just been so many restrictions upon us that I didn't even realize are on us, because we've always been living this way. And James Kitchen likes to say that we're kind of the frog in the boiling pot. Like, we don't even realize how restricted we actually are. So I'm starting to see that now. And yeah, in regards to Jason Kenney, man, if you could have seen our house on election night when he got in to be the premier, we were cheering, and we were so excited that he had won that election. So this has been really heartbreaking for me, especially to see him change his mind from things that he said in the summertime to now, from the speech that he gave in 2014 on freedom of conscience, to make generalizations towards the church and attempt to bind their conscience. Well, that has been really, really difficult for us to watch. I'm sure he's a great man. I know he has a lot of pressure on him. I know from James, just being a leader in the church, how difficult a church is to lead. I can't imagine how difficult a province is to lead when you have all of these political ideas happening. But yeah, it's been hugely disappointing for us to see in the last couple of months how he's handled them. I think he's a smart man, and I think it would say a lot if he started standing up for Albertans and letting off the restrictions.
So what would it take for him to win your support in future? Is it too late, or are there a few things that he can do to win your support back?
I'm probably going to get hammered for saying this, but I'm a person who believes in repentance, and my life is that. So I think if he was just the man that we elected, the man that he started doing some of the things that we believed him to be as the man running Alberta, I think he could go a long way in winning our confidence back. I obviously would have to discuss a lot with my husband, but I probably going to get hammered for this, but I don't believe anyone's beyond redemption. So
you know what? There always needs to be a pathway back, right? Isn't that what we all talk about? I know the premier's under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. I feel the same way you do. I'm gravely disappointed, and I just want him to be the guy I thought he was. So yeah. You've said that so well. Erin Coates, any final thoughts for us about anything that we need to know before I let you go? I know that you've gotten a lot of support from around the world. Like, give us some sense of how big a story this is. I've got a lot of people saying, why aren't we hearing any of this in the mainstream media? But it sounds like there's a ton of interest in your story. Where have you heard from? What's going on out there, and how can people continue to watch developments with what's happening in your case?
we've heard from people from Germany, we've heard from people from Iran, we've heard from people from Ireland, Scotland, Africa, Australia, all over the world. A lot of people from the United States. I'm getting a lot of requests to do interviews and podcasts, not with mainstream media, of course. And I think mainstream media, I think they've gone silent for a reason. I think they've lacked integrity in how they've handled this story, how they've reported things. And as my husband said, he thinks that the mainstream media in Alberta is on life support. And so I think that they say what they want to say, but they maybe don't report all the facts. But there is a huge just voice from the United States. I mean, I think I read today there was 16 states that have lifted the mask mandates and don't have any restrictions in place. We have lots of friends from Florida and Oklahoma and Texas, and they don't have restrictions. Florida let go of their restrictions a long time ago, and so they've been fully opened. Talking to a lot of churches in the United States, they don't have restrictions either. They're just living life as normal. So I think we're on the stage a little bit, at least with the Christian community, which is very large around the world, and that this is saying something about Canada, and I don't think it's good.
I agree with you. You are just a paragon of grace. I think everybody has just been amazed by how calm and poised you are, and generous as well, that even though you're going through a pretty awful time, that you're still willing to give everybody who's done this to your family another chance if they would just acknowledge what they've done and go a different direction. So thank you so much for your time today. We all pass on our best regards to your husband and hope that he holds up well, no matter how long it takes to get him out of remand. So thank you so much for your time today, Erin.
Thank you very much.
You got it. And John Carpay, we'll be speaking again with John Carpay, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom. And part of his roster of lawyers, as he mentioned, he has 9 that are already on staff, another 4 that he's planning on hiring. They have cases all over the country. We didn't have time to get into all of those today, but that will be our next segment, March the 18th. I was going to do one on March the 16th, but I have another obligation that day. I'll tell you about that a little bit later, but we'll be back on March the 18th with Jay Cameron and John Carpay and a couple of others of his staff lawyers. And I see Derek Fildebrand is back. So let me throw it over to Derek so you can give one more shout out to the sponsor and say some final thoughts about how people can continue to follow the great work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Danielle. Been a fantastic host as always. I also want to give a special shout out to Corey Morgan. I'm not sure if anyone saw him, but I had to bow out for some family reasons here, and I was able to get our 4-year-old down to bed while you guys were talking. But I was here for most of it. It was a fantastic conversation.
Praise be. That's a miracle, I think, Derek, for a 4-year-old.
I'll assume that, well, she's good, but it's a bit like calf roping. So shout out to Corey Morgan, who did a great job keeping things running smoothly while I bowed out. John Carpay, who's doing fantastic work at the Justice Center. People cannot overstate the work that he is doing right now. So everybody who's able to, John has been very modest in. He should be asking for money a lot more aggressively than he did. So if you can give, please go to jccf.ca/donate and kick in a few bucks. Lawyers are not cheap, and these guys can probably make a lot more money handling people's personal problems. Instead, they're devoting their careers to helping us all. So these are not lawyers making the big bucks. These are lawyers who are fighting a good fight. So please chip in and help them out. Do what you can do. And Erin Coates, I think the most common comments we saw come up, we had well over 1,000 comments, many more than that. The most common thread was this: you are grace under fire here, doing I would be a lot more visibly angry than you are right now if say my wife was thrown in prison for doing this kind of thing. So thank you so much for your presence here tonight, and thank everybody who's watched. We've had a tremendous turnout tonight. Share this, like it, share it, Get this out. If you thought this was valuable and that others need to see it, do your part. Share this through your circles. Email it around. It's on YouTube and Facebook. And we'll be doing some follow-up stories on this on the Western Standard tomorrow. Of course, if you support this kind of media that is willing to have an uncensored conversation about this kind of topic with these kinds of guests, please consider becoming a member of the Western Standard, westernstandardonline.com/membership. Try out a membership. It's $10 a month for standard membership, unlimited access. Try it out free for 15 days. See if you like it. Before we go, we also want to thank sort of a sponsor, but a group that's been helping to put together a lot of what we're doing, covidcommonground.com. There's great people there who are trying to collect stories and really credible stuff that is not necessarily, it's not the government's official propaganda, but it's also not the kooky conspiracy stuff. It's just solid facts and stories that you're just not seeing in most of the mainstream media. Check them out. They're doing great work. Again, thank you, our guests. Thank you all for watching tonight. It's been a fantastic episode. Have a good evening. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to run. James is calling me.
Oh, no, go.
Can you get him up? Wonderful evening.
Right.